Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into something fundamental, really universal. Why it's often so difficult, sometimes even dangerous, to interact with people we don't know.
Yeah, we're using your source materials here, particularly leaning on themes from Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers to unpack this.
Exactly. So our mission today is to explore what the sources call the stranger problem.
Right. We're going to look at these mental shortcuts and strategies we all use when we meet someone new.
Strategies that, as the material suggests, are often pretty flawed. We see this in everything from, job interviews to really high-stakes situations.
Police encounters, intelligence gathering, you name it.
Okay, so let's get into it. Why are we so bad at this? I mean, fundamentally, why do we misread strangers so often?
And what are the core assumptions, the sort of default settings in our brain that lead us astray, especially when the consequences can be, catastrophic?
Financial ruin, wrongful convictions, even international incidents.
It really starts with something foundational, almost counterintuitive. The sources call it truth default theory.
Truth default. Okay, so that sounds like our first instinct is just to believe people.
That's basically it. We operate most of the time under the assumption that the person we're dealing with is being honest.
Right.
And crucially, you need to understand this isn't really a flaw, not in the usual sense. It's more like the basic operating system for society.
A necessary feature, not a bug.
Precisely. Think about it. If you questioned everything, every single interaction, could you buy coffee? Could you drive your car?
No, you'd be paralyzed, constantly second-guessing everyone.
Exactly. Society needs that default trust to function. It saves immense cognitive energy. We wouldn't work without it.
Okay, but that default, that necessary trust, it creates a huge vulnerability, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's the perfect environment for deception to take root.
Because our minds aren't primed for suspicion. We're wired for belief.
Unearned belief initially. So spotting the liar, the fraudster, the spy, it becomes incredibly difficult. They're swimming with the current,
And the sources point to massive examples, like the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme.
Right. Madoff wasn't just a good liar. He exploited that default setting for decades.
People wanted to believe him. The regulators, the investors, they operated on trust until it was far too late.
He just had to seem plausible enough, operate within the bounds of that default assumption. He didn't need extraordinary deception skills every single moment. The default did a lot of the work for him.
So, if our default is trust, our first mistake, how do we even try to catch deception? That brings us to the second big idea, right?
Yes, the second flawed strategy. Our deep-seated belief in transparency.
Transparency, meaning we think we can read people, like their inner feelings just show on their face or in their body language.
That's the core idea, that a person's outward demeanor, how they act, how they look, whether they fidget or seem calm, provides a reliable, an authentic window into their true feelings and intentions.
What you see is what you get. If they look guilty, they probably are. If they seem sincere, they must be telling the truth.
But here's the crucial point the sources make. Transparency isn't a fact about human behavior. It's a belief we use to try and make sense of people.
A tool we use, but maybe a faulty tool.
Often, yes. A very faulty tool. Because people just aren't that transparent.
So what happens when we rely on it?
We get it wrong. A lot. The sources put it starkly. Liars can seem honest, spies can seem loyal, nervous people can seem guilty.
The outward behavior and the internal state, they don't always match up. They're decoupled.
Exactly. And the case often cited here is Amanda Knox.
Right, the American student convicted, then exonerated in Italy. Part of the case against her early on was her behavior, wasn't it?
Yes, authorities and the media found her behavior after her roommate's murder extremely odd, inappropriate somehow.
No.
Laughing, kissing her boyfriend.
And that oddness was taken as evidence of guilt, based on this idea of transparency.
But the takeaway from the source material is that weird behavior under extreme stress means, well, it just means someone is acting weird under extreme stress.
It's not reliable proof of anything deeper, certainly not guilt.
Absolutely not. So we default to truth. Then we use this flawed idea of transparency to check it. What's the third big mistake we make?
This one involves the environment, the situation itself. It's called coupling theory.
Right. Coupling. It's the idea that certain behaviors are tightly linked or coupled to very specific circumstances or contexts.
So someone might act one way in situation A, but completely differently in situation B.
Exactly. And the mistake we make with strangers is we fail to appreciate how much their behavior is tied to that specific context they're in right now.
Instead, we assume their behavior reflects their fixed personality, like, oh, he's just an angry guy.
Yes. We attribute it to their internal character, not the external situation.
Right.
Your coworker snaps at you, you think they're aggressive.
But maybe they just got terrible news 5 minutes earlier. The behavior is coupled to that news, not their essential nature.
Precisely. We ignore the context. And this failure has had huge historical consequences.
The sources bring up Neville Chamberlain and Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, a classic example. Chamberlain met Hitler, heard his assurances, and seemed to believe him, operating within the normal context of European diplomacy.
But Hitler wasn't operating in that context at all.
No. His behavior and words were coupled to a completely different context. Imminent, aggressive war. Chamberlain missed the context, focusing only on the surface behavior interpreted through his own assumptions.
A catastrophic failure to ask, what world is this person actually living in right now?
And you see it in espionage, too. Cases like Annabelle Montes, the Cuban spy inside the U.S. intelligence community for years.
Her loyalty seemed genuine to her colleagues.
Because her behavior was perfectly coupled to the context of being a dedicated analyst. Her deception was invisible because the context seemed normal. They weren't looking for behavior coupled to deep cover spy.
The sources also mention interrogations, like with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, KSM.
Right. Interpreting his behavior or lack of it was incredibly hard because it was coupled to the extreme context of high security, detention, and interrogation, something the interrogators might not fully grasp. What does silence mean there versus in a normal conversation?
Okay, so these three things, default to truth, the illusion of transparency, and ignoring coupling context, they set us up for failure.
They do, and the sources then look at how these failures play out in incredibly tragic, real-world encounters.
Which brings us to some specific, quite difficult cases discussed in the material. It's important we handle these carefully, just reporting what the sources and their critics say.
Absolutely. We need to stress that these interpretations, especially Gladwell's, are presented alongside significant critical pushback in the reviews.
Let's start with the Sandra Bland case from 2015 in Texas, a traffic stop that escalated horribly.
Yes. Gladwell's analysis, as reported in the reviews, tries to frame this through the stranger problem. He emphasizes how difficult the interaction was because they were strangers.
He suggests the officer, Brian Encinia, was perhaps genuinely terrified, misinterpreting Bland's actions, even her cigarette, as potential threats.
That's the interpretation presented, that the tragedy stemmed from these fundamental psychological misfires between strangers, leading him to ask for a degree of sympathy for the officer's perspective in that moment.
But the critical reviews jump on this immediately.
They do. They point out the obvious. Police officers interact with strangers constantly, every single day, usually without violence.
So, blaming the outcome primarily on the inherent difficulty of talking to strangers.
Risks, as one source puts it, replacing the complex reality issues of policing, power, race, training with a kind of simplistic banality. It potentially offers an easy out.
It shows the danger of applying a psychological theory too broadly, maybe, as an explanation that obscures other factors.
It's a key tension highlighted in the material. When does a psychological insight become an oversimplification or an excuse?
We see a similar dynamic in the discussion of the Brock Turner sexual assault case.
Right. Here, the source material explains Gladwell introduces concepts like myopia theory.
Meaning, intense intoxication makes people mentally short-sighted, unable to consider future consequences.
Yes, that extreme alcohol consumption creates the state of mental myopia, leading to impaired judgment and, in this interpretation, potentially a tragic misunderstanding of the situation, even with an unconscious person.
It frames the assault partly as a result of this temporary cognitive state induced by alcohol.
But again, the critical counterpoint is sharp and immediate.
What do the sources say in response?
Simply and starkly. Plenty of men are able to get bladdered without raping anyone.
So, again, the critique is that while alcohol is obviously a factor,
attributing the act primarily to a general psychological phenomenon like myopia risks downplaying individual agency, responsibility, and intent. It might explain part of the cognitive state, but not the specific action taken.
Okay, so default to truth, transparency, coupling, and these difficult case studies. Is there one overarching bias that ties all this together?
There seems to be. The sources synthesize it as a fundamental bias in how we see ourselves versus how we see others, sometimes called the illusion of asymmetric insight.
Asymmetric insight,
Mm-hmm.
meaning we think we know others Better than they know us.
Yeah.
Or better than we know ourselves.
More like we think we understand them quite easily while believing we are complex and hard to read.
So when I look at myself, I see nuance, complexity, contradictions, a whole hidden inner life.
Multitudes, as the sources quote. Shifting moods, hidden motives, deep history.
But when I look at a stranger,
We tend to assume they're much simpler. Straightforward, uncomplicated, easier to figure out quickly, like their surface is their substance.
we think we're deep and mysterious, but they're an open book.
That's the illusion. We overestimate our ability to penetrate their book while assuming ours is securely locked.
And that's why we misjudge so badly. Because we assume simplicity where there's actually complexity we can't see.
Exactly. The sources even use the analogy of watching a TV show like Friends. On the show, the characters are transparent. We know their thoughts, their feelings are clear.
But real life isn't a sitcom. People aren't characters with predictable arcs.
No, they're as complex and opaque to us as we are to ourselves, and likely to them too, which leads to Gladwell's core message, highlighted in the material.
What's that main takeaway?
It's quoted directly. "If I can convince you of one thing in this book, let it be this. Strangers are not easy."
It's a call for humility then. Don't assume you've got someone figured out after 5 minutes.
Precisely. Resist the urge to think the person across from you is simple. Recognize the inherent limits of your understanding.
Wow. Okay, quite a journey through these ideas. Let's quickly recap the big 4 mistakes or biases we covered.
Sure. First, the default to truth, our necessary starting point of belief.
Second, the illusion of transparency thinking we can easily read people's inner states from their outer behavior.
Third, ignoring coupling theory, failing to see how behavior is tied to specific contexts.
And fourth, that overarching self versus stranger bias, seeing ourselves as complex but others as simple, the illusion of asymmetric insight.
And the source material weaves these themes through an incredible range of examples, doesn't it? Madoff, Cuban spies, KSM interrogations, Amanda Knox, Sandra Bland, Brock Turner, even comparing real interactions to Friends.
All driving home that central point about the difficulty, the complexity of understanding strangers.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a really challenging final thought.
Go on.
Well, we established that society needs the default to truth to function. We have to cooperate, we have to trust most of the time.
Right, it's unavoidable.
But we've also seen the potentially massive, dangerous costs of that trust, especially when combined with our belief in transparency and our blindness to context in high-stakes situations.
So how do we reconcile that? How do you
Okay.
balance the necessity of trust with the dangers of misplaced trust?
It's a fundamental tension. Shakespeare knew it centuries ago. He wrote in Macbeth, "There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face."
No easy way to read minds by looking at faces.
Exactly. So if we accept that limitation, accept there's no art there, what's the practical takeaway for you? How do you navigate a world requiring trust, knowing how easily you can be wrong about the stranger in front of you? When do you override that default?
That's definitely something to mull over. Thank you for walking us through that.
My pleasure. It's fascinating, if unsettling, stuff.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it gives you a new lens for your own interactions. See you next time.